Now why do we do HLA typing? So today only we must take the last opportunity to revise the topic called HLA. Doctor, where do you find HLA D type and ABC type? On which chromosomes do we find? And what do you mean by MHC type 1 and type 2 molecules, etc., etc. Common questions in exam. So take opportunity, doctor, 2 pages in Harrison, talk everything about HLA typing. So that will actually improve our general confidence levels in exam. These are some of the testing topics. Now we have class 1 and class 2 types. It is on the chromosome 6, the genes which are sitting on it, alleles, they decide the expression of this both class 1 and class 2 type of MHC molecules. Now where are these class 1 molecules are expressed, in which type of tissues? Basically it is a transmembrane protein, and beta 2 microglobulin also is considered to be one of the class 1 molecule, and it is typically encoded by 3 loci on the chromosome 6 called HLA-A, HLA-B, HLA-C. These 3 loci will decide the formation of these class 1 molecules. Almost all the nucleated cells in our body express the class 1 molecules. Basically why we require class 1, class 2? We need to know that Mr. Ramu is Ramu only, he is not Bhimu. Because Ramu's HLA1 is different from Bhimu's HLA1, because their both chromosomes are different, because at least they did not inherit the same things from their respective parents, right? But RBCs which are non-nucleated and the CNS cells, they don't express the class 1 molecules, one of the favorite questions in the exam. Class 2 molecules basically contain 2 chains, alpha and beta chains, and whenever there is an inflammation, only at that point of time MHC2 molecules become expressed. That is what we have seen, right? What is the purpose of antigen presenting cells? They make these class 2 molecules to become expressive, otherwise they are not generally expressed, specifically expressed. So you have the A, B, C on the class 1 molecules, class 2 are the HLA-D. That is what we are very clear about. Now the question is, basically chromosome 6, how do we get it? Father provides 1 chromosome 6, mother provides another chromosome 6, that is how we have 2 chromosome 6s. Even our brother is having 2 chromosome 6 which are acquired from the same parent. Now suppose if my kidney is gone, you want to take my brother's kidney and place in me. What are the chances that my brother can have an identical HLA composition as that of me? Is a very important question. Now let us look into it. Basically this parent has got A1 type of one of the types, A1, 2, 3, 4 until 100,000 are there, let us say. A1 type is there among the A type of HLA. He has got B37 type. So this is what he got from the grandmother from this side, father's mother. Father's father had B40A9 and he donated that. That is how the father is formed. Mother is formed, she has B5A3 and B8A28 from this side. Now they produce 4 children. Whenever this gets transmitted, this particular chromosome, there is no chance that this A1 can go and combine with B40. Every time A1 moves, it carries B37. Because there is no splitting of A1 and B37 when that chromosome is coming from one parent, right? But when the B5 and A3 from the mother has come, even that also cannot divide. B5, A3 should come in toto together. So what is the chance that this composition A1 B37 and A3 B5 can be there in any of the other siblings? Only one more sibling can have the similarity. So there is only 1 in 4 chance that there can be absolutely matching copy of the HLA in your next sibling is what we have to basically remember. So that's the reason we should produce 4 children. By chance if somebody has got a renal transplant failure or requires, then we can provide. No, that is not the reason to break the family planning norms, right? Now the question is, Do we need 100% matching? Very difficult. Can you marry somebody with such a perfect matching? Impossible. You will have 10% or 20% matching. You will have a lot of mismatch, acute and hyperacute rejection reactions. Finally, in a chronic level, when you are celebrating your silver jubilee, you will recognize, fine, we can't help it out. That is called we can't leave them, we cannot live with them. So the rule of the game. So number of HLA mismatches, if it is 0, percentage of the kidneys that survive is 68. But number of the HLA mismatches, if there are one mismatch out of, there are 4 HLA genes, A, B, C, D, 4 into 2 is 8. But we don't take all ABC, all ABCD, we only take ABC. So ABC of father, ABC of mother, totally 6. So out of the 6, the transplanted 6. If the mismatch is, the number of mismatches is 0, still the kidney can survive in only after 5 years in 68%. If all the 6 got mismatched, also still 56% will survive after 5 years. So that is the reason we can still do xenotransplantation. What is that? Somebody died in a road traffic accident, brain death is there, cadaver, kidney is still functioning, you can bring it and place it in a total anamika, unknown person. So still it will survive. That is the whole beautiness of HLA matching. Then you have minor histocompatibility complex. Where is it located? It is on the Y chromosome. HY antigen is the one which is expressed, and also the contractile protein myosin is the one which will express HA2, which is called the minor histocompatibility complex, is what I like to underscore. Now let's go to the next question. You can see once more how important a topic of MHC we have to be doubly sure about. Now where are these MHC class 2 molecules are produced? Only inflammatory cells produce that. Macrophages, B cells, dendritic cells of the spleen and Langerhans cells of the skin, they are all the ones. And typically these MHC class 2 molecules are derived from the extracellular proteins. They are not cytosolic in nature. That's the reason it is also called exogenous pathway of the major histocompatibility complex, is what we need to basically remember. Now what is the purpose? If MHC class 2 got expressed, what is the big deal? If it got expressed, then TH, helper T cell, will recognize, oh, this macrophage fellow has caught the right candidate, now it is my duty to go and kill him. So how will he know? The moment he catches that antigen fellow, he will express that class 2 molecule, which is recognized by the glow. The helper T cell will go and attack it, is what need to be remembered. Now one of the options given to us was, is it responsible for the innate immunity? No. What is, by principle, what is the meaning of innate immunity? It is basically in a non-specific manner, in a non-genetic way. The innate immunity is mediated by your eosinophils, neutrophils, mast cells, basophils, etc. So it is not the MHC2 molecules, they are nowhere associated with the innate immunity, is what we have to be doubly sure about. Antibiotic colitis, all of you know very well, is caused by the Clostridium difficile. Now let us talk everything about aspirin. Is aspirin a wonder drug? Definitely. In obstetrics we use to prevent pregnancy-induced hypertension. Aspirin is also used for MI. Everywhere aspirin nowadays. Without aspirin, can we live after 50? Difficult. So now the problem with the aspirin is there can be central effects like giddiness, tinnitus, vertigo, headaches, etc. So aspirin brings down the inflammation. If aspirin overdose is there, do you come across hypo or hyperthermia? Very common question in the exam. No guesswork in the exam hall. So generally we think, okay, aspirin is used as an anti-inflammatory, so it will bring down temperature. Hypothermia, if we answer, then we are wrong. Hyperthermia becomes the adverse effect of the aspirin, though it is anti-inflammatory in nature. But it takes a bigger dose of the aspirin for it to cause that, and it can also lead to fatal Reis syndrome. Chronic interstitial nephritis is a major problem with it, and salicylism is the appearance of the tinnitus feeling the moment around 3 to 6 grams of aspirin is being taken every day, and the fatal dose in the adults is around 15 to 30 grams of aspirin, is what we have to be doubly sure about. In the last test only we discussed about warfarin induced skin necrosis which occurs in protein C deficiency, which we have to be doubly sure. So now the question is, it is between around 3rd to 10th day after the initiation of warfarin it will appear. There will be erythematous, indurated, purpuric, well demarcated areas of hemorrhage, and the breasts, thighs, buttocks, they are all the classical locations for the warfarin induced skin necrosis is what need to be remembered. Digoxin toxicity, doctor, any entrance we write, it is definite question. We must know everything about digoxin. So digoxin inhibits the sodium potassium ATPase pump, and because of that typically the calcium becomes sequestered within the cell, and that will increase the intracellular calcium levels, that will increase the inotropic state. So that is the whole purpose of giving the digoxin. This is a classical scenario. This is a normal heart's left ventricular volume to the left ventricular pressure loop. The moment the patient fails, he can't generate sufficient amount of pumping out pressure, and if you use the digoxin, how it improves and travels towards the normal side is what is being depicted. Now if your patient is receiving digitalis, doctor, and he comes and takes out an ECG, what changes will you see in the ECG? Basically it will produce a prolongation of the PR interval, and this is called the scooping effect of the ST segment. Suddenly looking at it, don't make a diagnosis of angina, which also can cause ST segment depression. Called the scooping effect on the ST segment, and changes in the T wave morphology, they are the important changes. Now what aggravates the digitalis toxicity, doctor? Any hypokalemia, advancing age, even hypomagnesemia, hypoxia, renal insufficiency, acute MI, and even hypercalcemia. So calcium's hyper and all the remaining hypo predisposes to the digitalis toxicity. Tell me, doctor, what is the most characteristic arrhythmia that you come across in digitalis toxicity? AV nodal junctional rhythms, they are the very characteristic feature. What is the reason for the origin of them in digitalis toxicity? Digitalis acts like a parasympatholytic agent, mimetic agent, and all that excessive parasympathomimetic activity with the AV nodal blockade is the one which will make various arrhythmias to arise. So AV nodal junctional tachycardia is one such. Now let's go to the next question. What are all the scenarios where we use the magnesium is a very important question. All of you know, eclampsia of pregnancy, obstetrics posting, pumping the magnesium onto the two gluteals is the only minimum thing that we can do, that we need to do. Now how does magnesium help to bring down the seizures in the level of the brain? It is the NMDA receptors, N-methyl deaspartate receptors, which are the ones which are typically the interaction with them is responsible. So you can see that these are the neurons, you have the NMDA receptors, and these NMDA receptors activity, hyperexcitability of it is the one which is responsible for the seizures which you see in the case of the eclamptic women, and this NMDA receptor is blocked by the magnesium ion is what we have to basically understand. Now magnesium is also used in another important arrhythmia. What is it called? Torsade de Pointes. Is it tachy or brady? Tachy arrhythmia. It's an example of a VT, ventricular polymorphic ventricular tachycardia it is. So typically you don't find a similar morphology throughout the arrhythmia, polymorphic it is. It swindles like a wave, that's the reason it is called torsade de Pointes. Giving magnesium is one of the important things that need to be taken care. And what is the main complication of this kind of torsade de Pointes, doctor? Any point of time this can become a VF, that's the reason we have to be very careful. And also in tetany, which can occur because of hypocalcemia, sometimes even hypomagnesic tetany is also there. Even there also we use the magnesium is what need to be remembered. Now is there any role in asthma? Very much. Typically in acute asthmatic exacerbations, intravenous magnesium sulfate in a dose of around 2 grams over 20 minutes is the one it is being administered is what I like to underscore. Now let's go to the next question. We use various asthmatic agents, common question in the exam. What is their classification mechanism? Chromalin inhibitors, chromalin like drugs which are mast cell release inhibitors, beta 2 agonists, bronchodilators, corticosteroids which are anti-inflammatory. We must be sure clearly about what is their mechanism. So corticosteroids, whenever there are severe exacerbations, they are indicated, but if you give corticosteroid, do you expect relief immediately? 4 to 6 hours it will take. So don't give steroid and then sit. Always include beta 2 agonist, which is salbutamol, is considered to be the king among chemicals in managing an asthmatic exacerbation, is what need to be remembered. So ipratropium, like anticholinergic medications, beta adrenergic agonists, methylxanthine, they all are the powerful bronchodilators that we commonly use. Now the drug transport, is it passive or an active phenomena? It can be passive with a diffusion, or it can also be a facilitated diffusion, or even an active diffusion is what has to be remembered. If you give an intravenous drug, the duration of action of it, what are the important factors that decide it? It is a protein binding, which is a very important determinant whether the volume of distribution is going to be more or less. Similarly, the lipid solubility of the drug also will decide. If it is less soluble, it becomes less diffusing into the tissues and remains more in the plasma. Now, clearance, rate of metabolism, volume of distribution and redistribution, they are all the important determinant factors. So how do you decide volume of distribution, doctor? You will give certain dosage. After that you will check what is the plasma concentration. If the plasma concentration is low, means it distributed very well. If it is high, means it distributed less. So volume of distribution is inversely proportional to the concentration achieved. That's the reason the dose administered divided by the peak serum value will give you the volume of distribution, is what has to be remembered. Now let us talk about the bioavailability. What is the importance of this? Basically, whenever we give a drug, only a fraction of it will appear in the plasma. How much, what fraction of it appeared in the plasma is fundamentally judged by the bioavailability of the drug. So how do you know that? Give orally the same drug, give intravenously that drug, and you try to plot x-axis time, y-axis is the concentration of the drug, both after orally given, after IV given. So the area under the curve when orally given into the dose given by IV divided by the area under the curve given by IV into the dose given orally. So this ratio will give you what is called as the bioavailability, is what you need to basically understand. Now what will prevent or decrease this bioavailability? Suddenly if the drug goes into the liver and there it is being killed, bioavailability come down. So first pass metabolism, and the drug is released into plasma like an esmolol, and esterase comes and immediately breaks it down. Metabolism of the drug will decrease it, and the poor absorption from the GIT, they are the three determinants of the poor bioavailability, is what you need to fundamentally understand. Let us talk about the esmolol, which is an important beta blocker, very selective. So it is an ultra short acting cardioselective beta 1 blocker without any membrane stabilizing ability or partial agonistic activity. Basically beta blockers are divided into with and without membrane stabilizing activity, and based on their lipid solubility also beta blockers are divided. Common question in the exam. So esmolol is the drug which is used for terminating the supraventricular tachyarrhythmia. Similarly for episodic atrial fibrillations and also any arrhythmia coming at the time of anesthesia also, esmolol is the one you slip it. What is the advantage of esmolol compared to that of your any other drug, doctor? Other drugs remain in plasma little longer. So any antiarrhythmic is by nature a proarrhythmic drug. So arrhythmias are a complication, common complication of any antiarrhythmic. But that is not the complication of esmolol because of its very short half-life, which is a very major advantage. Like any other beta blocker which is not given in a heart failure patient, even the esmolol also is what need to be remembered. Highly active antiretroviral therapy and their adverse effect profile is a common topic in exam, doctor. So all of you know zidovudine causes the bone marrow suppression, so anemia, neutropenia is typically seen. Myalgias, myopathy is another important feature, lactic acidosis, hepatomegaly, steatosis, convulsions, encephalopathy, They're all the problems with the zidovudine is what need to be remembered. Another common question is asked about the protease inhibitors. What are the classical examples? Sacanavir, Indinavir, Ritonavir, Nalfinavir, Lopinavir, etc., etc. Any of these virs are being given, patient becomes a vir. Why? Your patient's wife will come and say, my emaciated husband nowadays is looking very plump, sweet and once more acceptable, doctor. What is the secret? What is that antiretroviral therapy? Can you guess? Protease inhibitor. Why? Protease inhibitor, after you give, it will cause a lipodystrophy. Then he develops once more, his sunken cheeks become little chubby because of the lipid redistribution. His nape, which was almost skeletal, once more picks up the fat. So because of this lipid redistribution, emaciated patient looks little more chubby. That's the reason wife congratulates you, wonderful doctor you are. I'll get all the remaining friends of my husband who are also having the antiretroviral. Then your practice of antiretroviral will pick up very well. So in fact there are certain niche areas, doctor. HIV specialist, you are the best in the society. You can plan for a Magsaysay award, going to New York and receive the international prize. Suppose if you are a regular DM cardiology, only you will end up in doing the interventions. So be very sure that no specialty can be called as lesser or more. It's the work and the people working that brings grace in that. So lipid redistribution, lipodystrophy is an adverse effect of the protease inhibitor. Nephrolithia has a specific problem with the indinavir is what need to be remembered. And they also will cause hypercholesterolemia, hypertriglyceridemia, pancreatitis. They are all specific problems with the protease inhibitors. Today only you must knock out this topic after going home. Common topic in exam. Glucocorticoids basically act in inflammation by increasing the lipocortin, not decreasing it. Now tell me, doctor, where does lipocortin come into picture in the whole inflammatory cascade is my question to all of you. So tell me three mechanisms by which glucocorticoids are anti-inflammatory. Induction of lipocortins, decreasing the cytokines IL-2, IL-3, IL-6, etc. They also inhibit the IgE mediated histamine release, and also they act on the leukotrienes, and they will decrease the expression of inflammatory receptors, ILAM, ICAM1, etc. is what has to be remembered. They decrease the collagenase production and acute phase reactant production, everything is being decreased. Now what is the other name given for the lipocortin? Lipocortin is also called annexin basically. Now where does it come into picture? All of you know the cell membrane phospholipids, they are acted upon by the phospholipase A2 and they release the arachidonic acid and that become metabolized by the cyclooxygenase and prostaglandins become generated. So your aspirin etc., they NSAIDs, they basically act at the level of the cyclooxygenase. Then your lipocortin inhibits the phospholipase A2. So cortisol increases this lipocortin production and indirectly causes phospholipase A2 inhibition and prevents the release of the prostaglandins, which are the predominant inflammatory mediators. So it will increase, not decrease the levels of lipocortin is what need to be remembered. In gluconeogenesis and glycolysis, what are the rate limiting enzymes and how is the rate limited? Common topic in the exam, we must be very sure about. So we need to know, doctor, glucose becomes the pyruvate and in that process we call it as glycolysis. You have the fructose 6 phosphate become fructose 1,6 biphosphate and for that you require phosphofructokinase 1 and phosphofructokinase 1 is the chief regulating enzyme in the case of the glycolysis. Then the reverse is true where fructose, typically fructose 1,6 biphosphate is the one which is becoming fructose 6 phosphate. For that you require fructose 1,6 biphosphatase, which is considered the rate limiting enzyme in the case of the reverse gluconeogenesis. Now the question is, if you have phosphofructokinase 1, you also have phosphofructokinase 2, then what is that fellow doing? Basically phosphofructokinase 2 is the one which will convert the fructose 6 phosphate into fructose 2,6 biphosphate. In turn, fructose 2,6 biphosphate will cause a stimulation of the phosphofructokinase, and it will enable the glycolysis to go in a forward direction. So 2 will cause fructose 2,6 biphosphate formation, 1 will cause fructose 1,6 biphosphate formation, is what we have to be very, very clear about. Now we have one more enzyme called the fructose 2,6 bisphosphatase, which will cause the breakdown of this fructose 2,6 biphosphate, and if the fructose 2,6 biphosphatase is abundant, what will happen, doctor? All this fructose 2,6 biphosphate become broken down, it becomes less, and there is no driving force for the phosphofructokinase 1, and the glycolysis cannot go ahead. So that is what need to be remembered. So now the phosphofructokinase 2 typically has got a kinase activity and causes the is the one which will make the glycolysis to go in a forward direction. So out of all, which is the rate limiting enzyme in the case of the gluconeogenesis, doctor? Typically it is the fructose 1,6 biphosphatase. Where does it come into picture? Fructose 1,6 biphosphatase is the one which is converting fructose 1,6 biphosphate towards 6-phosphate, is considered to be the rate limiting enzyme. Now what is that substance which will cause a control of this fructose 1,6 biphosphatase? It is the fructose 2,6 biphosphate is the one which is controlling the fructose 1,6 biphosphatase, is the way we need to fundamentally remember. So fructose 2,6 biphosphate stimulates, or will it inhibit the gluconeogenesis, doctor? It inhibits the gluconeogenesis, it stimulates the glycolysis, it inhibits the gluconeogenesis because it inhibits the 1,6 biphosphatase, is what I like to finally summarize. Now, what is the effect of glucagon? Glucagon increases the glucose level, right, in the plasma. That means it should stimulate the gluconeogenesis. That means it should cause more amount or less amount of fructose 2,6 biphosphate. It should cause less amount of fructose 2,6 biphosphate. So for that, what does it require? It requires to stimulate the fructose 2,6 biphosphatase. So how will it do that? Basically, the glucagon will cause the G protein stimulation. G protein in turn will cause the adenylate cyclase activity, and that in turn will cause the cyclic AMP to become elevated, and elevated cyclic AMP will stimulate the protein kinases, and those protein kinases in turn will cause the fructose 2,6 biphosphatase activity to increase, and that in turn will cause the fructose 2,6 biphosphate levels to fall down, and that in turn will cause the gluconeogenesis to go in a forward direction, is what we have to finally remember. At least in exam, the way examiner can put us, try to pull us and break us is it phosphorylated form or unphosphorylated form, which is active and inactive. So once more you need to go through the table and keep your eyes glued onto that and be very sure at the time of exam to answer. So that is very important. Too much of cramming for entrance sometimes, we have no way. Now which enzymes are important for the polyunsaturated fatty acids, doctor? You have a desaturase which will cause introduction of the double bonds, and you have an elongase which will make the chain to go forward. So these are the two enzymes which are important typically in the PUFA synthesis, is what need to be remembered. Now methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, is it a very important strain? Definitely it is a nightmare for an intensive care physician. Which drugs you will use suddenly if your microbiologist declares a war on your intensive care unit by saying that lot of MRSA on every bed it is there? Then what will you do? Vancomycin, linezolid, and quinaprestin and dalfaprestin combination, trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole and minocycline, all of them can very much be used. One of the options given was teicoplanin. Teicoplanin is not used. Teicoplanin is used for the Clostridium difficile associated pseudomembranous colitis. Now let us have 1-2 comments about the mechanism of action of each of these anti-MRSA drugs, doctor. Common topic in exam. Let's talk about 1-2 comments on linezolid, because a lot of times a confusion comes. Is reading Harrison better, Davidson better, taking coaching is better, not taking is better, taking mock test is good, or prepare and then take mock test is good. Anything is good, doctor, which brings the real tranquility is the right way. So linezolid is basically the one which is used against the MRSA, and it acts at the level of the protein synthesis initiation. It will prevent it by stopping the 30S and 50S components of the ribosomes is what need to be basically remembered. One of the characteristic adverse effects whenever you prescribe your patient linezolid, doctor, tomorrow, thrombocytopenia must always be kept in mind, and it is also a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. If your patient on linezolid eats cheese, then he can land up in trouble, and painful sensory neuropathy and lactic acidosis, other important problems. Then the quinaprestin and dalfaprestin are the two wonderful musician brothers. So these are both bacteriostatic, but combined they act like bactericidal, except on Enterococcus. They can't act bactericidal against it. They are on that which remains bacteriostatic, Enterococcus. And it is once more the protein synthesis level is the one which is being inhibited by this important group of drugs. But what is important about the quinaprestin that you should never forget, they have a high affinity to cause an inhibition of the CYP3A4. So that's the reason any other drug metabolized by CYP3A4 can become affected if you are using these drugs. Just like rifampicin stimulates the CYP3A4. Then you have the teicoplanin, which is active on the gram-positive organisms, including the methicillin resistant Staph aureus. It is a glycopeptide and has got a wonderful activity and spectrum similar to that of the vancomycin, is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now let's go to the next question. But what is the specific indication of the teicoplanin? Teicoplanin is specifically effective against the pseudomembranous colitis caused by the Clostridium difficile. Now what are the complications of the cyclosporin, common immunosuppressant? Of course now taken over by mycophenolates, sirolimus, they are now ruling the immunosuppressant regimes. So cyclosporin can cause nephrotoxicity, hepatotoxicity, it increases the blood pressure, hyperkalemia can be a problem, gum hyperplasia, hirsutism. So everything about cyclosporin we must be sure about. Certain drugs can inhibit the steroid biosynthesis and can lead to development of a drug-induced Addison's syndrome. What condition, what drugs they are? Metapyrone and ketoconazole, aminoglutamide and mitotane, they are the important drugs which can cause steroidogenesis to become inhibited. Now what does National Health Policy 2010 says? Eradicate the polio and yaws. By when? By 2005. But did we eradicate? No. That is called planning, right? So then eliminate leprosy, did we? Very difficult. Then Kala Azar, very difficult. Eliminate lymphatic filariasis, Garibi hatao. But Garibi will never be hatao until Amiri continues in this country, right? So achieve zero level growth of HIV. Oh, that means everything which is ambitious is called planning, doctor. Be very, very sure. So sometimes you say, I planned a lot for preparing today, but nothing is happening. Nothing can happen. That's the reason it's called planning. Then reduce mortality by 50% in TB, malaria. Actually, we are trying to do that, but TB is increasing by 150%. That is a major problem, right? Then reduce prevalence of blindness by 0.5% possible by 2010. Reduce IMR to 30 per 1000, MMR to 100 per 1 lakh by 2010. These are some of the important dictums of at least the dreams of the National Health Policy. Which is a live vaccine, doctor, among them? BCG, yellow fever and mumps, but not hepatitis B and pertussis. Hepatitis B contains the viral envelope protein, surface antigen. So that's the reason it is not a live one, it is rather a killed one. Now louse, mite, tick. We always have a confusion. So at least one evening we shall take to eradicate that confusion by today evening. So lice, doctor, these are lice. At least have some real imagination how a lice look, frog looks, snakes looks, etc., etc. So epidemic typhus, relapsing fever, trench fever, dermatitis. Lice are considered to be the vectors. Some or the other way you try to remember, doctor, these three things. Then you have the fleas. Flea basically causes four conditions. Plague is flea, this is flea, flea bitten state. Kidney also has a flea bitten state, where in the case of benign or malignant hypertension, changes in kidney. Benign, malignant, very good. All that hemorrhagic spots will give that flea bitten appearance. Okay, easy to remember flea at least. Then endemic and murine typhus are by them, chiggerosis and hymenolipus. These are the things which are flea driven basically. So we finish louse, we finish flea, then we have ticks and mites. Ticks and mites are one of the major group of arthropoda. Out of all species, which is the biggest class? Arthropoda. Common question in the 12th class exam, right? So you have hard ticks unfortunately and soft ticks, two groups to remember here. Tick typhus is by the hard tick, viral encephalitis, viral fevers, and Kaisnur forest disease in India, tularemia, tick paralysis and babesiosis. They are all basically by this hard ticks. Then you have this fellow who is a soft tick basically. Q fever, though by aerosol transmission, it is also, there is a remote concept that it is also caused by the soft tick. Then relapsing fever also, there is a soft tick born, and also KFD also can be the soft tick. Then you have the mites. Typically they resemble the ticks, and they have four pairs of legs, and their body, unlike the ticks which is well demarcated to head, toe, and the full, they can compete for a Miss World competition, but mites cannot compete because they don't have a head, feet and everything, right? So they have four pairs of legs but not well demarcated thorax. You have two types of mites, doctor, trombiculoid mite and itch mite. Trombiculoid mite is the one which is responsible for your scrub typhus, which is transmitted by the Susugumoshi is the one which is responsible, and you have the itch mite, the Sarcoptes scabi is the one, and burrows in the epidermis, all of you know very well. So the lice, the ticks, the mite, and what else? The first one is the lice, the fleas, yes, the ticks and the mites. You must be quite confident in answering tomorrow's exam without mixing one with the other. Then what are the viruses which are capable of causing a fetal damage? Teratogenic viruses. Parvovirus is capable of causing anemia, non-immune hydrops fetalis. It causes the erythroblasts in the growing fetal bone marrow to become destroyed. Even in adults it can cause aplastic anemia. Parvovirus is what has to be remembered. What is the role of the female health worker in our machinery, doctor? Typically she is also expected to carry on certain obstetric work, and also she is expected to be the leader for the DICE in the sub-center, some of the important functions. Now, revised national tuberculosis program. What are the goals? What do we want to do? In India, how many people die with TB every minute, doctor? Alarming figure is there. 2 deaths occur every 3 minutes. 20 people die every hour with TB. If you are working, which is the first post-mortem report you have written, doctor? Death summary. At least me and my colleagues, for most of us it used to be the TB used to be the first case in MBBS housemanship. I don't know your experience. Obstetrics is another important place where first time you will be penning the death summary, but TB is very killer disease, doctor. Now at least RNTPC, Revised National Tuberculosis Program, says 85% cure rate of infectious cases need to be taken care by giving the short term well monitored DOTS therapy. Then case finding activities must be aggressive. Sputum must be examined to detect at least 70% of estimated cases, and non-government organizations must actually take participation. You need to associate with them. Some of you may start after your MD, a good number of NGOs also. Then also talk about TB every time you are talking about HIV. talk about multi-drug resistant TB and the challenges, because your patient may remain non-compliant and he may be propagating the MDR TB, and also engage the people who are non-governmental. It's called the public-private mixed ventures is what has to be initiated. Then what is orthotoluidine test and orthotoluidine arsenate test? They are the two different things to make life little difficult. So both the free and combined chlorine, they are the ones which are being estimated by the orthotoluidine test, not the one alone, is what has to be remembered. And there is a modification which is being done called arsenate test, and in orthotoluidine arsenate you can separately calculate both the free and also the combined chlorine levels.